Hiya. So in this video, we're going to look at one aspect of setting up a literature review, screening or synthesis using NVivo, and it's that aspect of setting up your project. We would have found over the years with training people who often come on when they're doing a literature review in NVivo, looking for various, training on different aspects of it. And very often the first thing we have to do is fix the database because it's not set up correctly to optimize the data so we can get the most out of it in terms of queries, visualizations, profiling, returning, linking across to metadata from themes and concepts coded. So it's a very important piece of the work. So we're going to set up a literature review, and we're going to make some assumptions in this. First, that you know how to do a literature review. So we're not explaining the elements of what an extraction tool is. We're going to demonstrate setting up one and the different aspects of it and coding to it, but not necessarily explaining the process in and of itself. There's lots of videos out there for that. We're going to make an assumption later on about cases and classifications, that you fundamentally understand cases and classifications, because that's the element that's often missing when people set up a project. And if you don't understand it, then you need to look at, we'll put a link in the video in the introduction there to a video explaining cases and classifications, because it's a concept you need to understand to be able to set this up properly. So we're going to use version 14, which is the current version, but it would be a pretty identical interface to older versions like NVivo 2020, sometimes referred to as R1. And it would be pretty much the same on Mac as well for both versions. And the concepts certainly are identical in both Windows and Mac. Some of the mechanical steps might be slightly different for some of these things on a Mac, but there would be separate videos and tutorials on those as well. So we're going to use the standard tutorial that comes with NVivo. It's an environmental study called Environmental Changes Down East, which is shipped as the tutorial study with every version of NVivo. So you're going to have a copy of this file. We can make this file that we now alter and amend available to you as well. If you want it on a download, you could maybe send a request to YouTube or whatever if you want that. So in this, we're taking the standard tutorial, we're applying reflexive thematic analysis as the main methodology, data analysis method. Now that could be IPA or grounded theory. We're just happening to pick a very commonly used one, which is Brown and Clark 2006-2020. So there's your 6 stages of Brown and Clark. And there is a separate video again on conducting a thematic analysis in NVivo. But mostly literature reviews happen before you collect your data. So we're going to make that assumption in terms of the coding part of our extraction tool, and we're going to set up codes initially just for literature, and then potentially we'll be adding these other primary related codes from your interviews and focus groups or surveys or whatever later on after you collect data. So most studies start with a literature review. So we've set up a folder here under files for our literature. Now, there's a number of ways you can import literature into NVivo. The simplest way is if you have the PDFs, you can simply go up here to Import, Files, browse to your folder, select all your PDFs, and in they come. If many people start out with referencing software and they import directly from the referencing software, because they've already kind of organized some of the literature into folders by author or subject matter, etc. And you can do that from Citavi, Mendeley, EndNotes, Otero, or RefWorks. If you import that way, you get the metadata attached automatically as a file classification. But that's not enough, and we're going to come back to that a little bit later on. But that comes in automatically if you bring in from one of those. We're going to bring it in from Citavi. We're using Citavi as our referencing software, and that's simply because the developers of NVivo are also the developers of Citavi, that's a Slumi Vero, and therefore there's deeper integration between Citavi and the others with NVivo, naturally. So if you have a free choice in the referencing software you're using, then I would suggest you use Citavi because it adds some dimensions to it that the others don't have. So the only difference then with Citavi would be, this is the environmental changes study. This would be a literature review, which would normally happen first and very often in a referencing package. This would be the literature review. conducted in Citavi. The difference in Citavi is there's an area called the knowledge area, which means you can draft the structure of your paper, which fully integrates with Word and puts in the quotes and the structure and the headings and everything else into your Word document. So that's one extra dimension. And as well as that, there's in the referencing area, there is an option there to automatically share all of this with NVivo. So it just simplifies the process. There is a separate video if you're importing from any of the others using either an RIS file or an an XML file in the case of EndNote. It's a separate video. If you need to know the steps for that, ping us an email if you can't find it on the account, but it's there on the channel. Now, so we simply hit the share with NVivo, and then back here in NVivo, we do the same thing. We come to the import tab, add from Citavi, tell it which project we're importing, and then come the files. If it's a reference to a book, it'll make a blank file, but it'll attach the metadata and a memo with your notes, the abstract, and the keywords where that data exists in the referencing software. It's probably a good idea if you're using referencing software to do an audit first and just check on that your links, your files are correctly linked, and that you're using the desktop version. So if it's Mendeley or FWorks, you can't import from an online version. Now they're free. You just have to install the desktop version and it synchronizes. And that's why it synchronizes the files locally. If you're trying to import from a linked file that's already on the web, then it's behind a firewall and NVivo won't be able to get its hands on it. So a couple of things they're explained in the other videos as well. So now I end up with my documents in here. We've taken in 34 articles all around environmental change. Now, normally people will start to code, and they miss a very important step very often. Not always, but very often. They'll miss a very important step, which is setting up cases and classifications. Because if I add cases and classifications, I can use certain visualizations that I can't otherwise use. I can use certain matrices and certain, cross-tabular queries, all of which depend, and coding queries, all of which depend on cases in the background. So I've ruled out a whole ton of tools, standard tools in NVivo, that I now can't use when it comes to retrieval and reporting that I could have used if I'd simply done the next bit, which we're going to show you now, which is making cases out of these. So to make the cases, we would do Control A, select all, right click, create as cases. We tell it to put them into the literature cases folder or wherever we want to put them. You can see I've already put them in there, but we just click on the folder and we say OK. That's all we need to do. We could make the new classification here for the metadata, or we'll come to that maybe in a minute as a separate step, but you can do it either way. So once I say OK to that, what you'll find is that a 1 immediately appears beside all your transcript, because the entire audio, or the entire publication has been coded to a case. Down here in your cases, I would have them in a separate folder, and there they are. There are 34 of them. There's all my publications. It's going to assume the name of the file that I've imported. So there they are with the 1 beside them all. So they've all been linked. The next step is to link them to the metadata. Now I can do this manually. I could create a new classification here. I could call it something like literature metadata. And I could manually add the metadata like the year, etc. If I wanted to, I could just make a new attribute, call it, year. That's if I don't have it already in something like an Excel document. And you'll see when I open up this metadata that the cases are all, they're not linked. Let me link them. Let me go back to my cases here. And I need to link them. If I had done that in the way in with that option, just create a classification, it would have linked them automatically. But all I have to do is go to classification here and link to the literature metadata, and now all my cases are linked. And now I have the year column in there as well, which I would then have to go in and populate. So this is 2023, so I can go in and I can put it, it's a one-off to enter the field. If there's any more 2023 ones, that's going to be there as a lookup for me. But that's cumbersome. I have to enter each attribute that I want to, like discipline, year, author, type of, methodology, quant, qual, those kind of things. So I have to add them manually. So most people do this, usually, more often than not, they do it in Excel. So I'm going to go back here to my case classifications, and I'm going to remove that manually inserted attribute there. We just get rid of that because I don't really want it. Feels like work, so I've just removed it. Now I'm going to add from Excel. Now, as I said, you don't have to do that from Excel, but many people do. I'm just going to open up the Excel document to show you typically what one of these things would look like. So I could have dumped this from my referencing software. I could have manually constructed it. You'll find that often if you bring it in directly from the referencing software, that there's too many in there. Do you really want the DOI number? Are you going to be, they're going to be different for every study. So the classic ones, like the type of article, whether it's a journal article, whatever, the year, the discipline maybe. Or I may have ones that I want to add myself, like I may want to have a field for method and have quant, qual, mixed methods as the values. So I can have any number of these, and I just set them up in Excel. The only thing is that I would have to use the same name of the case as the first column, because that's the ID that's going to match this information on. And that's all I need to know. So we're going to import that file now. So I'm going to close that. And I'm going to save myself a little bit of time by just doing here, import classification sheet. And I'm going to browse to my Excel document, and there it is. And we'll say next to that, going to leave those 3 boxes ticked. It's telling it to make new ones if they don't exist, and clearly they don't at the moment. It's going to update the existing items. I already have my cases, so it's going to update them. It's not going to default to new ones. And I'm going to overwrite anything that's there, because often with literature reviews, you're building up that spreadsheet. You're still doing some analysis work on the documents that you have, so you want to occasionally update that table and overwrite it with new information. So that gives you the option to do that. This is the only change I have to make in this step 3 of a 4-step wizard, so it's pretty straightforward. It's asking me here now that it knows I already have the cases. Where are they? So I'm clicking on as names. We're matching, but they're not in the cases folder. They're in a subfolder called literature cases. So they're the ones I want to match to. And I'm telling it if there's a mismatch, let's say I have a paper in Excel that I don't have the physical paper in NVivo, or the other way around, then I'm going to end up with a half a case. Either the publication in the case and no metadata, or the metadata and no publication. And I can add either once I know there's a problem. So I'm telling it to make the cases if there's a mismatch. And then I finish, and that's job done. Everything is now in place, correctly linked. And there it is. Now that means I can do a number of things immediately. I can set a baseline for my literature review. I can say these are the number of, this is the year and the representation globally for all these articles that I've published, that I brought in. I can see the span of years that I have. And later on, when I have themes coded or concepts coded, I can look at the representation there to see, well, is this an old discussion or is it up to date? Has the literature changed very much in those periods? Because I can drill down into any of those and read the comment for a theme or a concept from 2000 and see how similar that is to 20 years later. So that's the purpose of setting up cases. It's a game changer when it comes to analysis. So that's our database now set up. Whether you import from EndNote, import the PDFs and then set up the classifications manually, or import the PDFs, make cases, and then import the demographics or the metadata from the likes of Excel, or a text file, or a CSV file. Now, I'm in the business of extracting. This is the structure of my paper. Because I imported from Citavi, they come in as codes. So any work I've done in Citavi already, if I've added references, if I've quotes or notes, the notes will come in as embedded annotations and see also links and the cross-referencing, and also the codes will be created and the comments put in wherever I have stuff. So, and of course, that was an automated process only because it came from Citavi. Nothing to stop me bringing them in from EndNote or bringing in the PDFs. I'm just creating this as a set of codes because this is the stuff I want to write about. This is the stuff I want to review. So I can do this manually, or we just automated it because we could. And the idea then is that there's two parts to the extraction tool. There's concepts that I'm looking for in the literature, which I can search and code for. I can either read through the transcripts or the PDFs and code them, or combine that with some searching, because the language, unlike your primary data, will be much more consistent in literature. Climate change, global warming, these are universal terms that you're going to find easy to find in literature. So I have this structure set up. Whether I'm extracting by just reading through each document, which I can do, I can just go up here to my documents. I can open up any of those articles and I can code them. So I can have the article open on the right. I can have my conceptual framework open on the left. Oh, it's open the wrong one. I opened the memo. And I can have, there it is there, sorry. That was, so I can have the article open here and I can read through it and I can code to my extraction tool, insofar as that these are concepts that I'm coding for from the data. I'm going to come back in a minute and just talk to you about searching, because it's very effective when you're using literature to search as well, to augment this process with some searching and updating those codes by automation. But there's another aspect to it, which could be things like the more quantifiable aspects. So you could have a scoring system based on the quality of the paper. Do they mention limitations? Is the methodology clear? And I might score the paper 1 to 5 because I want to look later on in my conceptual framework to see the quality of the papers that are informing it. Or I could have a black and white, a quantifiable thing like methodology. It's either quant, qual, or mixed methods. So I might have an attribute and I just populate that. Now I can code directly from the text into these themes, but if it's a quantifiable one, then I would do it down here. So this is this article. If I go down here to my cases for the literature, there's the same article. I can either right click on it, go into the case properties and add whatever value that I want to add here, if it's not already added, and as it is in our case. Or I could go here, which is just one step below here, where I can see the article, and I can also see at a glance what these values are, and I can change them. That was 2012, it should have been 2015 or whatever. I can just change it here. So I can add the closed elements of black and white quantifiable elements of my extraction tool here as I'm reading and assessing the article, but I can also put the more conceptual stuff directly in here as passages of text. Now, I mentioned a minute ago about searching, because the literature language tends to be much more consistent. The jargon is used is often very easy to identify and to find. So let's say I want to start off by just finding all the references to climate change, and at the very least making sure I don't miss any. Sometimes the context might be incorrect, but I can ignore it or I can remove it. So I'm going to go down here to my queries area, and I'm going to run a quick search to populate these codes. It's an easy way of doing it. So I'm going to type in here, I want to find climate change. So I'm going to do closed quotation, climate change, close my quotation. I'm going to use a near operator. Now if it uses that, because that's wrapped in quotes, if it uses, and we have separate videos on text searching as well, but send me an email if there's any of these videos that you want, or if you can't find them on the channel. I'm going to use a near operator here, because sometimes they might say, like our ever-changing climate. So I'm saying if it's, if climate and change are within 5 words of each other, give it to me. And I'll tell it when it's at it to give me some context. Give me some, basically the paragraph, if it's mentioned. So I run it, and I instantly get through all those articles there. Now, I've got other stuff in here like social media, and I've got interviews. So I'm going to actually select items here, and I'm going to limit that search to just the literature. Well, we know we have this climate change stuff in our interviews, etc. So you may not have any interviews at this point. So there it is, just coming from the literature. I've just filtered on the literature. Now I want to update my code with all these comments. I can see some of them talk about climate change a hell of a lot more than others. So now I can save my result. And instead of making a new code, because I already have it in my framework, I can merge that into an existing code. I can select, I can go to climate change in my literature coding. It's under environmental change. No, it's not. Yeah, it is. It's under methods, literature review, climate change. And it's now putting all those comments, those paragraphs into my code. Job done. So I can quite easily populate this framework, and I can see in the code all the different articles and their representation. Go down and I can immediately find the passages that are represented. My time is now spent in a more intellectual pursuit, attaching a memo to climate change and summarizing what the literature says, instead of opening and closing PDFs and doing Control F to try and find something. And potentially missing somewhat because I'm looking for something else and climate change is mentioned in there, but I don't notice it. And you can't duplicate content in the code. If I'd already manually coded some of these passages, it wouldn't duplicate them in the code anyway if the text search also finds them. Now, also later on, when I'm working away on my literature extraction tool now and populating it, I might have one here called governance. So governance has references from the literature. But now it's, let's say later on, I've now done my literature review and I'm now using my interviews and now moved on to my primary data. And I'm now writing the findings from my defined and named themes. And lo and behold, we have governance issues here like policy. So I could copy that code from my interviews, go back up to my literature extraction, because I'm thinking about my discussion now. I've framed my findings in my defined and named themes, but in my discussion, which is really phase 6, writing the report, I might decide I want to now merge certain files into some codes that are similar or related area into governance, which I've now done. Now that means when I open up governance, what I'm seeing here, if I look at these tabs on the side, is I'm seeing in the text tab here, the lived experience, attitudes, beliefs, behaviors from primary participants. There's everything Charles said about governance. There's everything Barbara said. Charles made 4 contributions, Barbara made 2. But then if I click on the PDF tab over here, there's all the authors who have also written about governance and the extent to which they've written about it and the relevant passages. That's a game changer when it comes to framing my discussion. I'm now directly comparing the lived experience to the theory. And that's the advantage of using a tool like NVivo, because referencing software is not designed to do any of those things. This is a properly constituted relational database. And if I go to that extra step of setting up my cases and classifications, I can have a really effective tool that I can use in a much more robust way when it comes to literature review, screening, or synthesis. So I hope that's helpful. Please, if you thought that was useful, like and subscribe or click the bell. Or if you have any questions, post them on the chat and we'll reply. And if you want any of that stuff downloaded, if you want a copy of this file, for example, we can send you that as well. Thank you.